Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is David Talbot. I'm Managing Director and Head of Research here at Red Cloud Securities, and I'm delighted to host another Red Cloud webinar on uranium today. We are going to hear from Ur-Energy CEO John Cash. Now, during today's webinar, he will provide an overview and outlook. Then we will take your questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time. We'll get to as many as we can. But before we kick things off, we need to discuss the fine print. During this Ur-Energy webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I direct listeners to the forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of its corporate presentation. That can be found on the company's website, ur-energy.com. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell. We note this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. So please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on Ur-Energy. Now, John, it's quite an exciting time for uranium and uranium equities. Uranium prices have over doubled since the beginning of 2023. Particularly since the supply-demand imbalance was emphasized, I guess, last summer. Prices again have hit 15-year high. It was up to $107 a pound as of late last week, settled down to about $103 a pound yesterday. The U.S. government certainly has thrown its support behind nuclear power and the nuclear fuel cycle. They will be acquiring and funding the creation of HALEU fuel, and the Russian uranium import ban is working its way through Washington. So there have been unanticipated uranium production challenges in both Kazakhstan and Saskatchewan, and that's further adding as well to the supply-demand gap. So with that said, why don't I turn it over to you, John, to speak about Ur-Energy.
All right, well, thanks, David, and certainly it's good to catch up again and talk about Lost Creek and Shirley Basin, our two flagship properties. And as you've indicated, David, it's a hot time in the uranium space right now with incredible pricing. Looks like we've got good support for that, fundamental support on the supply-demand side, as well as government backing. And it looks like the demand for uranium is going to continue to grow in the short term to the long term as more reactors are being built around the world. So with that, I'll just jump into the presentation. We always like to start off with a photograph of our operating Lost Creek plant. It's been up and running now since 2013. And the drums on the right-hand side, that was our first shipment that went out way back in 2013. So we've been at this for a little while. As David indicated, I will likely make some forward-looking statements during the presentation, so we do encourage you to be aware of that. There is certainly risk to uranium mining, and we encourage you to read our risk statements that are included with our public disclosures. And do your homework before you invest. So with that, because the market is hot right now, we have a lot of investors or potential investors moving into the space that are not familiar with what in situ mining is. So we've taken our standard corporate presentation, and I've added a couple of slides here to really show you what in situ mining is. And this is our operating Lost Creek mine. This photograph was taken last fall. But you can see we don't mine using conventional techniques. Instead, we install water wells that go into the ore body, and we inject CO2 and oxygen at Lost Creek. Those are the only two things we inject. And that dissolves the uranium in the ore zone underground, and we simply pump it back up to the surface, recover the uranium, and then pump the water back down into the ground. But you can see the footprint here is minimal. That is the worst of the surface impact right there. And when we get done mining, we will take those wells out. We'll take the header houses out, the collection points, take out the power poles there, and within a few years of revegetation, you won't even be able to tell we were there. And that land will be returned back to free release, so it can be used for anything. And here's a cross-section, a geologic cross-section that kind of highlights what I've just described. In the middle of the photograph there, down underground, you see that black area, that crescent-shaped. That is the ore body. That is the shape of these roll-front geologic types of ore bodies. The two blue injection wells, that's where we inject the CO2 and the oxygen down into the ore zone. And then the yellow well, that is the production area where we pump that water loaded with uranium back up to the surface. It then goes to that little house there in the top left. They're called header houses. It's nothing more than a distribution point with a manifold. And then from there, it goes to the processing plant to recover the uranium. So neat, clean, tidy process. It is utilized to recover now over half of the world's uranium, including in the US, Australia, and Kazakhstan. So it's a preferred technology when the geology and the hydrology allow it to be used. And it's very low cost, environmentally friendly. So we'll talk about two of our flagship properties. I do want to highlight, we do have other properties that we don't talk about a whole lot because they're not near-term production. But we have a series of more greenfield exploration areas. We also have another one that would be moving into the development stage. That's Lost Soldier. It's a ways from production, but it does have a resource on it. And we're taking a look at that one to see where that fits into the pipeline of production. But really, for the sake of investing and for this conversation, the near-term revenue, the near-term operations really is focused on Lost Creek first because it's up and running. And then second would be Shirley Basin because that is potentially a near-term producer for us. But as I indicated, Lost Creek has been in production now since 2013. We've produced about 2.8 million pounds of U3O8 through 2023. So that number is actually growing as we ramp up production. But in 2023, we started bringing more header houses online to ramp up production. And that's because the price of uranium was coming up and we were signing contracts, long-term contracts with major utilities and fuel buyers that equate to 3.75 million pounds, plus or minus a flex. But those contracts gave us the faith to begin to ramp production back up to commercial levels at Lost Creek. So at Lost Creek, we've got a very good resource in the ground, 11.9 million pounds of M&I measured and indicated, and an additional 6.6 million pounds of inferred resource. We have a very good reputation of being a low-cost producer, and I'm not just going to say that and leave you hanging. I will actually present some numbers for you a little bit later in the presentation, but we've got a very good mine life at Lost Creek, fantastic resource there, and some opportunity to grow that through exploration. Over the life of that project, we've had 6 different exploration programs. Every one of them has been successful at bringing more pounds into the resource categories. So we're optimistic that with additional exploration, we can continue to grow the mine life and the defined resources. The license for Lost Creek allows us to mine 1.2 million pounds per year and allows us to process 2.2 million pounds per year. The delta between those two numbers is certainly intentional because that allows us to bring in pounds either on resin, ion exchange resin, or a slurry from a different operation, whether that be from a competitor or from one of our other satellite facilities in the future. And that plant capacity is already 100% built out. It is ready to rock and roll. The tanks are there, power's there. Everything is ready to go for that 2.2 million pound a year capacity. Dryers are installed and operational. So at Shirley Basin, that particular project is also in Wyoming, also will be an in situ property, but it is permitted, it is construction ready. And we will make a decision to build that out and operate it as our contract book indicates that that's the right thing to do. It's got a licensed capacity of 1 million pounds per year from the mine. The plant, if we decided to build out a full plant, it is licensed at 2 million pounds a year. But we intend to build it out as a satellite and produce 1 million pounds a year from that satellite. That satellite, we will load ion exchange resin there with uranium, and then we will simply ship it over to Lost Creek for processing there. That's a lot cheaper to do that and have some trucking cost than it is to build out the back end of the plant and put in a full processing facility. But our license allows us to do the satellite or a full plant, whichever we prefer, at our discretion with no further regulatory approval needed. So Shirley Basin's got a good resource, 8.8 million pounds of measured and indicated, a very good grade of 0.23%. Very interestingly, Shirley Basin is what we believe the birthplace of in situ uranium mining globally. And back in the very early 1960s, 1961, it started off as an underground mine. but they had so much trouble with water inflow that somebody came up with the bright idea of, hey, instead of fighting this water inflow, could we work with that instead and add the chemicals underground to dissolve the uranium in place and then pump it to the surface? So my records here that we have that shows that was about April of 1961. By 1963, they had advanced that and got it permitted, and they started the world's first in situ uranium mine. It was an experiment. It was a very small area, but they did successfully recover about 1.5 million pounds of uranium. They ultimately decided to go with an open pit so they could better control water flow. They just didn't have the confidence on in situ since it was a brand new technology, but ultimately that technology spread around the world. So for Shirley Basin, when we do pull that trigger to bring it into production, we're looking at about a 24-month time period. We have already started to procure long lead items because really of that 24 months, that's really what's holding us back on that. The actual physical build out of the satellite, which is a relatively small building, we believe will only take about 6 to 8 months to be able to do that. Now, to build out a mine in 6 months, I know that sounds incredibly fast, but keep in mind, this is in situ. It's not conventional, so the build out is much simpler, and it's a satellite too, so that makes it simpler even yet. So Lost Creek, when we built out that mine, it only took us 9 months, and that was a full processing plant. So we believe we can build out Shirley very fast. Capital cost on that for the satellite plant and the first couple of header houses, looking at around $40 million of capital expenditure to do that. So I'll move away from our properties just for a little bit, and then I'll come back to them. But I would like to talk about the investing thesis with nuclear. Really a couple of points to make here. Number one, it's carbon free. So the world is moving toward nuclear because of that attribute, but also national security concerns as well. It gives you good base load energy, reliable energy. And a lot of nations are saying, hey, we need to move toward that, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine and that supply of natural gas out of Russia. That became pretty questionable whether anyone wanted to rely on that or not. But nuclear is already a significant source of energy around the world. 436 reactors in operation, 59 in construction, and over 300 have been proposed. So we're seeing tremendous growth moving forward, largely because of the carbon-free attributes of nuclear. Some of the recent news out of COP28, I believe there were over 20 nations globally that said nuclear is important, and we commit to tripling our nuclear power output by 2050. And so some of the numbers we're seeing on reactor builds, planned reactor builds, support that number and those commitments. Small modular reactors, they can become important in the future. Right now, there's very little demand for uranium from them, but there could be several hundred SMR reactors in the U.S. By 2050 or shortly thereafter, according to the NEI in a poll of its members. In fact, not too far behind me over here in Wyoming, TerraPower, which is a company that's owned by Bill Gates, and Pacific Power, which has ownership by Warren Buffett, are looking to build the first small modular reactor here in the U.S. In Wyoming. So that's being licensed and is in process. And those are obviously two very big names supporting that project. And if anybody can get it done, those two gentlemen can. So I won't go through the entire slide here, but I would like to point out that top bullet. China is really the gorilla in the room when it comes to reactor builds. Their plan is to build 150 reactors in the next 15 years, so 10 per year. They have 24 reactors under construction right now, and they continue to say they're going to meet that target. So China alone is in the midst of a massive build out, and the rest of the bullets just kind of list the other countries that are involved. The list is quite exhaustive. In the U.S., we have seen tremendous support from Congress, and that support is growing. Again, it's largely because of the carbon-free attributes of nuclear power. And so a number of bills have been passed to help out, not so much the mining end of the fuel cycle, but certainly the energy generation from the utilities with acts like the Inflation Reduction Act that were incredibly helpful, the Civil Nuclear Credit Program as well. And we continue to see that support going forward. Manchin and Barrasso, some tremendous support in the Senate. The LADA's Nuclear Fuel Security Act passed through the House. We're also looking at a bill right now that the House has already passed that's in the Senate that would cut off the supply of of uranium coming out of Russia, and that could have an impact on the market going forward. So we'll see how that legislation continues to move forward. But nonetheless, there are not too many things Republicans and Democrats agree on, but uranium certainly is one of them. So I spoke about geopolitics briefly in Russia, but Russia is the major refiner of uranium in the world. So they do a lot of the conversion of yellowcake and the subsequent enrichment to move toward making fuel pellets. So they really are quite dominant globally when it comes to that. And the U.S. and others are looking at cutting off of that supply, and that can have an impact on the price of uranium conversion and enrichment going forward. I think more important than that, though, is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan supplies nearly half of the world's uranium. They're certainly under Russia's sphere of influence. You might have seen earlier this week that the cabinet resigned. I don't know what that's all about, but there is some political strife there. But if Russia leans on Kazakhstan, or if that supply out of Kazakhstan is put in jeopardy or put at risk in any way because of geopolitics, that could have a fairly significant impact on the price because they are so dominant in the global market. And we would like to think that the Western world can backfill that supply out of Russia and Kazakhstan, but the simple fact is there are not enough mines. In fact, there are not enough mines that are even proposed to backfill that supply. So that's one of the reasons the price of uranium has been increasing, is because of that supply risk. So taking a look again at Lost Creek, the map there on the left, the blue area is the area that's permitted and licensed. That's where we're operating right now. We also control everything in the green, so about 35,000 acres in that immediate block in the Great Divide Basin of Wyoming. Over the 10 years of production, we have averaged 90% recovery of under-pattern resources. To put that into context, most in situ mines in the U.S. get 60 to 80% recovery, so we are setting the standard there with very high recovery rates. We also enjoy extremely low royalty burdens at Lost Creek and at Shirley Basin, averaging less than 1%. That is tremendously helpful when it comes to economics. Many of our peers have royalties that average 3 to 8%. I even know of some properties with royalties of 15%. That is very difficult to be profitable, even in a hot market, when you have to take a 15% haircut right off the top. So we have a lot of room to explore within Lost Creek and the surrounding area. Right now, we are mining in the HJ geologic horizon, but we also know that there's mineralization in the KM, the L, the M, the N, the FG, and other geologic horizons that have had minimal exploration. So we look forward to moving into those areas and to explore and hopefully bring in some more resource from those geologic horizons. So I teased you a little bit earlier by saying that we are a low-cost producer, and the proof is in the pudding. Here are the actual audited numbers. This is not a model or a hypothetical. These are actual numbers from 2014 through 2019. I'll just draw your attention to 2015 because that's where we really enjoyed the economies of scale, and our average cash cost that year was a little over $16 a pound. The all-in mine site cash cost that year was just a little over $33 a pound, and throw in a little bit more for corporate overhead, and that puts you into the 40s. We know we're not going to get back to those costs. Inflation is absolutely real. It has an impact, but we don't believe we're going to be terribly far off either. And so we believe we can return to being a very low-cost, reliable producer. We've proven that production capacity in the past. So right now we are actively engaged in ramping up production. We are drilling. We have a good number of drill rigs on site. That this slide here says 2 header houses, but we have 3 header houses online now with very good grade, over 90 parts during the fourth quarter of last year. That's exceptional. That head grade likely won't stay there as we bring on more flow and we deplete the ore body, but we certainly don't model that high. That was much higher than expectation. We continue to work on expanding our wastewater disposal capacity and making some good progress there. One thing that's been a challenge for many operators is the supply chain. Fortunately, since we are an established miner, we are able to simply recycle a lot of the electrical components, transformers, motor control centers, and just keep advancing them forward. But we are having to order other things 12 months to 18 months in advance. So there is a supply chain crunch. We're not suffering at Lost Creek from that, but certainly it gets in our business when we build out Shirley Basin. That's why we've already pulled the trigger to buy those long lead items at Shirley Basin. So a number of those things are in progress. We have our staff hired. That's been challenging. The unemployment rate in Wyoming is around 3%. So effectively, anybody who wants a job has a job. But we are very pleased to be able to say we have all the people we need at this point. So just a couple of things on the Green Revolution. We're glad to be a part of that story. And I won't read through all of this, but the top bullet is just a compelling statistic that I like to share. And if you take a look at the energy that will be produced from our resources at Shirley Basin and Lost Creek, compared to the same energy generated from a coal-fired power plant, we will offset more than 300 million metric tons of CO2, which is the equivalent of taking over 67 million cars off the road for a year. That's just amazing. And no matter how many times I go over that, that's mind-boggling. So research and development is near and dear to our heart. It's a part of our DNA here at UR Energy. The top four bullets there, they kind of just enumerate some of the successes that we've had in the past. We've also announced that we have two ongoing R&D projects. One deals with well casing and installation methodologies. The other is advanced filtration of water, treatment of that wastewater, so we minimize the amount of wastewater we generate. So we've had to pull our manpower off of that, but very shortly now, we'll be putting manpower back on that as we work our way through the ramp-up process. So taking a look at the financials, we have a very good, strong cash position, just short of $60 million in the bank at the end of the last year. We do have a little bit of debt that we owe to the state of Wyoming. The state of Wyoming has been incredibly supportive, and they actually gave us a loan to build out our Lost Creek mine at a very good interest rate. So we still owe just a little bit on that. Our final payment on that is in October of this year, and we're very grateful for that support from the state of Wyoming. We have 3 long-term contracts in place right now. Keep in mind that all of those were signed many, many months ago when the price was not nearly as high as it is right now. But nonetheless, they were well in the money for us on an all-in basis. So those we expect to be profitable as we ramp up to economies of scale. We also have a lot of additional room to contract going forward. Right now, just short of 3/4 of our licensed capacity is essentially unhedged. It's uncontracted and open to the market. So we have a lot of room there going forward. So moving toward closing here, slide showing the market position. We do have, when fully diluted, a little over 300 million shares out. Again, just shy of 60 million in cash market cap. This number has been volatile, as you guys that follow the uranium space know, but right now it's around 500 million on the market cap. One thing I really want to highlight on this slide is we have some incredibly sophisticated shareholders. The names I'm listing there in that middle panel on the left, those are some of the most sophisticated names in the uranium space. And so we're very proud to have them on our register of shareholders for the company. We think that's a testament to the quality and the value of our properties. And we are a very liquid story. We've been averaging about 2.5 million shares traded per day. That number actually has been climbing, and so I'll need to revise that, but looks like we're now over 2.5 million shares a day when you look at the New York American Exchange and the Toronto Exchange combined. So in closing, we're just in a really great position right now as the market is taking off. We're looking at signing more contracts because we've got that production up and running now and the ability to expand that production at Shirley Basin to be able to sell into those long-term contracts that give us stability in the long run. So we're excited about that. We have our people in place. We've got a good reputation for good, consistent production at low cost. Ramp up has not been easy. We've been very open about that. And David mentioned some of the struggles globally with ramping up mines. Post-COVID is a different world from the position of supply chain issues, inflation, manpower. All of those things are kind of the perfect storm that are really holding back global production. And we've suffered from some of those things too, but many of those are behind us now. We're excited about the future as production steadily is increasing, and we'll be coming out with more news on that as part of our annual report that comes out. Typically, we would put that out early next month. So be on the lookout for that. And so many catalysts right now in the market. So I think 2024 is going to be an incredibly exciting year. And so, David, with that, there's my contact information. If anybody has other questions that we don't answer now, please feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Thank you, John. Great presentation as always. So now we're going to kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. Reminder to everybody, you can put your questions into the chat box at any time. And we already have quite a few questions here, John. Maybe start off on the political side. You know, what do you see the federal government support, how do you see the federal government support for nuclear power playing out? And are there any important issues that the Fed is addressing specifically that would impact UR Energy? UR Energy.
Yeah, you got it.
The uranium producer.
Yeah. You know, the federal government and Congress, the White House, it's often referred to as sausage making. I think that's a really good description, because even when there's agreement on a topic, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get passed by both the House and Senate and then be approved by the White House as well. So there are a number of bills that have been working their way through Congress for a long time. They get beat up, they get sent back, they get beat up again. Some of them get passed, some of them don't. And that's true in the nuclear story as well. It's convoluted, it's complicated because of all the fits and starts. But we do have good support on both sides of the aisle. We have support from the White House. Most importantly, I think in the near term, what to watch out for is sanctions on Russian imports into the U.S. That has been passed in the House. 100% vote in favor of that. It's unanimous. It went to the Senate, and they went for a unanimous consent vote so they wouldn't have to debate, but they weren't able to get unanimous consent. 1 out of 100 senators voted against it. That means they have to go to floor debate and full consideration. So that's going to have to be scheduled for this year, and we are optimistic that it will get passed. But optimism, and $6 will get you a cup of coffee these days. So we don't know if it'll get passed or not, but we're optimistic. Beyond that, HALEU legislation, the U.S. government is looking to support HALEU. There's some legislation out there now to support HALEU and funding of over $2 billion to support HALEU with a preference for domestic supply of uranium. So that would be directed toward purchasing domestic uranium. But it's only a preference. It's not a requirement. So we can't claim a major victory there until one of us U.S. producers gets a contract. But that is a significant amount of money. A lot of that will go to the back end, the HALEU, the technology there and the build out there. Not all of that would go toward uranium purchasing. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that, David, but there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of optimism on Capitol Hill, tremendous support. But going from optimism and support to something that's tangible in legislation, it's a long haul. And we're working on that. We're advancing that through the UPA, and we'll see where that turns out.
Certainly all that attention in the sort of the public press, public free press is getting a lot of eyes put on this uranium industry for sure. So Now you did talk about there not being enough uranium mines in the West. Has that sentiment really filtered down to the nuclear utilities that need uranium? You know, the World Nuclear Association said in September that not all companies, not all projects or reactors that need uranium will get it. So those are pretty strong words. Have you seen any increased urgency from utilities that you're speaking to?
Slowly but steadily, there is an increased sense of urgency. I would say early last year when we would talk to utility customers, the attitude was nothing to see here, no concern, there's plenty of uranium supply. But I would say over the last year, that attitude is slowly changing. There is a greater sense of urgency, not so much in the very, very near term, but certainly in the midterm, 5 years out and further. That supply gap between supply and demand, it looks to me like it's going to continue to worsen. It takes a long time to find uranium deposits, do your baseline data collection, get regulatory approval, get it financed, build it out, and ramp it up. You're talking about many, many years, even in the best case scenario. So that supply gap that's there, I don't see it going away in the near term. I think it actually gets worse over the next few years before the uranium miners are able to respond to that and catch up. And a lot of these things are simply beyond the miners' control, like regulatory approvals. Here in Wyoming, we're probably in one of the best places in the world as far as regulatory approvals. And we're still looking at the absolute best case, 3 or 4 years for a license amendment to bring in a small production area. If you're going to permit a full new mine, you're probably looking at a minimum of 5 years. I know of one particular project that's been in permitting for over 12 years with not much of an end in sight. So jurisdiction is important there, but it's difficult. And then you throw in ramp up issues like supply chain and labor and expertise, and that just exacerbates the issue. So I think we're going to continue to see a big gap there for a long time.
Right. And you know, that gap might be made even bigger. You know, one source of demand here is going to be the small modular reactors. Can you maybe address some of the issues of the SMRs and what might get those up and running more quickly?
Yeah, there are a number of big companies globally that are looking to advance SMRs. Right now, I think there are 3 in operation globally. Russia and India have them up and running. The technology is not new. This is not a technological leap for us. A lot of the technology that is being dusted off came from the 1960s and 1970s, so certainly is not new, but improvements are being made on that to make them intrinsically safe so that no matter an earthquake, no matter loss of external power, they physically don't have the physics that would allow a meltdown. So a lot of that technology has been improved on. But again, I'll get to the licensing issue. And I'll speak just to the U.S., not to globally, but here in the U.S., to get a small modular reactor licensed, you're looking at many, many years to be able to do that. Minimum probably 5 years, maybe pushing 10 years to be able to get something licensed before you can even approach the build out of that. So I'm a technology wonk. I love the SMRs. I think they have a brilliant future. However, we're not going to see demand next year for uranium anyway. I think we're looking at probably 5 to 10 years out before we really start to see that demand grow. However, when it does take off, it could be a tremendous additional demand. Again, the NEI is projecting as many as 300 reactors in the U.S. by 2050. That's insane. That's incredible. And so that you're spot on. That could actually widen the gap between supply and demand going forward.
Okay, great. A couple of general ISR questions here. And compared to nameplate capacity, what's the utilization of ISR facilities? What do they tend to operate at? You know, why don't they operate at 100%? Is it recoveries or equipment or other aspects?
Yeah, you know, the percent of capacity that they operate, I think, is really a function of their contract book and the market, more so than it's related to technical matters. So I think typically if the market is where it needs to be and supportive, most in situ operators would run 80 to 90% capacity. You could push 100% capacity depending on what your other constraints are. Wastewater disposal historically has been a constraint for many in situ operators, certainly is a constraint for us. That's why we're advancing that capacity at Lost Creek. But no, I think typically in a perfect world, you'd want to run that 80, 90% capacity of your nameplate. And that's what you're designed to run. You can make a Prius do 110, but it'll be screaming. Most people would rather do a little bit less than that.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the second ISR question in a sec. I think we're segueing into another question here. But, I think you are going to be producing more uranium in the U.S. than anybody else. So right now, your goal is to deliver into long-term contracts. Mm-hmm. And you've got about 570,000 pounds scheduled for delivery this year. With prices where they are, up over $100 a pound, and likely, I'm assuming, well above your contract pricing, do you plan to increase your production to sell into the spot market right now? Does that?
Yeah.
Because the more you produce, the lower your fixed costs are as well.
No, you're exactly right on all accounts there. We certainly have not announced any numbers on production targets. We certainly want to produce into our contracts, and you're spot on, 570,000 pounds this year. Those are locked in right now. We've received binding notice from our utility customers on that. So yeah, our production this year, minimum 570,000 to fill those contracts. You're right. Our cost of production is dramatically less than the current spot price of 103 to 107, depending on what service you subscribe to. And so if we have some opportunity there to sell into that spot, we'll take advantage of it. One thing that the listeners may have caught on to is that the chart I put up of our cost. If you plot the cost versus the amount we produced, there is a strong relationship there. And there are a lot of fixed costs at any mine, not just ours, for any mine. So the more you're able to produce, the cheaper it gets on a per pound basis. So typically, in a perfect world going forward, we always want to produce as much as we can when we're in a hot market, because that drives down our cost of production and it makes us more profitable. So I've danced all over that question, but I think I've answered it.
No, I think you have. So, and then maybe, I don't think you can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Production ramp up numbers over the next 5 years, 570,000 pounds this year. I guess it just really depends on the contracts for.
Right. So again, at a minimum, that's spot on. If you take a look at, it was toward the end of our slide deck, but it provides the schedule of production, 570,000 pounds this year, 600,000 next year, 700,000 pounds the 2 years thereafter. That would be our minimum that we're targeting for production from Lost Creek or a combined Lost Creek Shirley Basin, should we decide to ramp it up. But again, if the market's hot, we may take advantage of that.
Yep. Opportunistic. Yeah. Okay. Back to the ISR question, and probably about labor. How much attention does an ISR facility demand? Do you have demand at 24 hours a day, or just can you monitor it remotely? And I guess, this comes down to how much training is required in the US. How important is making sure you've got a substantial labor force?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. One of the advantages of in situ mining is during operations, we can literally operate the entire mine at a $1 million pound a year rate with 2 people. And typically that's what we operate on nights and weekends, 2 people. So that really helps keep our costs low. Where our manpower is really dedicated to, though, is the construction of additional mine units moving forward. That's really where the manpower is at. So on an all-in basis, right now, our company, we've got 75 people, 65 of them are at the mine site. Very, very few of them are actually in the operations itself. Most of them are construction and other matters. As far as training goes, it's quite diverse. Our geologists, I would say we don't turn a geologist loose until they've had a minimum of a year of training. That first year, they are under heavy scrutiny and a lot of hand-holding. It's complicated, a lot to learn. Other positions maybe takes as little as 2 or 3 weeks for training. Our plant operators, well field operators, they're going to be watched very carefully for the first several months. So that's kind of a broad spectrum of training, but most of our operational staff can be trained up within a few weeks to within a few months.
Okay, thank you. Now, your Lost Creek ISR plant, probably the Cadillac of all ISR plants. I'm a Cadillac guy. Remind us where the plant, the license capacity is, the operating capacity is. So, and is there going to be any excess capacity once both Lost Creek and Shirley Basin are up and running at capacity?
Yeah. So in Lost Creek, the mine, we can recover up to 1.2 million pounds per year from the mine. The processing plant, we can recover 2.2 million pounds per year. And that gap between the two is intentional. It's so we can bring in pounds from Shirley Basin and process there, or from a competitor. We've had 3 different microcap juniors approach us to ask us about processing at Lost Creek. All of them were too early stage to really have a serious discussion, but nonetheless, a lot of companies have expressed interest in bringing in pounds. But no, that's the very astute question from the listener is, do you have capacity? So certainly we have capacity for the Lost Creek mine at the plant. But if we bring in all of the pounds of Shirley Basin and we maximize production from the mine, that is pretty well going to consume all of the plant capacity. But keep in mind, if we need more capacity, number one, we do have the option of building it out and licensing it at Lost Creek. We do have room there to be able to do that. But number two, we could also build out the back end of the plant at Shirley Basin if we choose to. And that's already permitted. We don't need any additional approvals there to build that out. So if we did decide to build out the back end at Shirley, that means we could process 100% of the production there, and that would free up Lost Creek for one of our other projects, like Lost Soldier, for example. So we do have some flexibility there. It's not something we could turn on overnight, but it's something we could do very quickly, probably within a year of making a decision to do that. We could have that done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Shirley Basin, you said, is already permitted right there. Nothing else needs to be done.
Right.
You've got $60 million in cash. How much do you need to build Shirley Basin satellite plant and the initial well fields? And is there anything that needs to be done at Lost Creek in order to accept Shirley Basin feed?
Yeah. So no, there's nothing that needs to be done at Lost Creek. We could literally begin accepting resins today. The physical infrastructure 100% in place, 100% operational, 100% manned. We're ready to go. For capital expenditure at Shirley Basin to build out the satellite plant and the first couple of header houses, we're estimating a capital cost there of around $40 million to do that. So we've got, like you said, just shy of $60 million in the bank at the end of last year. That $40 million is going to put a hole in that $60 million, but we are seeing revenues coming in now. We had a little over $17 million last year from the sale of uranium. We'll have significantly more than that this year, and then again more next year as we continue to ramp up. So we do have line of sight on that revenue to help keep us going. I'll never write off the need for maybe going out and getting a little more money to keep us going, but we're in a very strong cash position right now. Very, very pleased with where we are.
Right. Okay. And timeline of getting that going, again, depends on the contracts.
Yeah, that's right. Our directors, we are frequently having calls talking about the contract book, talking about the market, where we see it going. And once we get more comfortable with some contracts going forward, that'll be our decision point on Shirley Basin. We're not quite there yet, but that could change very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you've done a lot of R&D over the last couple of years in the well field to help reduce costs, looking at alternative injection well construction materials and methods. Have you been able to start implementing any of that knowledge?
So as far as water treatment goes, we've got some pretty cutting edge water treatment in the processing plant. Those are things we've developed, and we're looking at advancing that more. Right now, we are already recycling greater than about 99.5% of our water. We'd like to get up to about 99.8% recycle rate. And so we've made great strides on that already. People question, is this just an issue of cost savings or is this an issue of ESG? And the answer is both. Getting rid of water at a mine or at an oil field is expensive. And so the less wastewater we generate, the cheaper it is for us. So that certainly is on our mind. The other technology with regard to well installation, we have a little ways to go on that. We're very pleased with the results to date. And in fact, if you go on to Google Patent, Google actually has a service that they track all the patents in the U.S. Patent Office. So if you go to Google Patent and you type in UR Energy, our pending patent for our well installation technology will come up. I'm very excited about that. We do have a little ways to go on that, though, before we prove it out. But so far, results have been good, knock on wood. But we won't do our victory lap quite yet on that.
Okay. At Lost Creek, right now, you're mining the upper sandstone units. How might you be able to extend the life of mine from your existing well fields there?
Yeah. So we have a number of different geologic horizons that have had minimal exploration. Early on, back in the 70s and 80s, when a lot of the drilling was done at Lost Creek, they were targeting open pits. So a lot of that drilling didn't go over 400 or 450 feet. And so as we've come in and we started in situ mining, we're drilling deeper, and we see that below the HJ in the KM horizon in particular, there's some very good mineralization there that is pretty open for exploration throughout that 35,000 acres. Below the KM, there are at least two more geologic horizons below that we know and we have seen contain mineralization, but there's even less exploration and definition in those because they're deeper. Typically in the in situ world, we don't like to go below or deeper than 1,100 feet, maybe 1,200 feet. It just presents some technical challenges with well installation. They can be overcome, but there's an associated cost. So a lot of that exploration work that even that we have done, we typically don't look below about 1,100 feet. But from 1,100 feet up to the water table, virtually every single sandstone horizon is mineralized at Lost Creek. In fact, I would say if you drill a hole at Lost Creek, it's very likely you're going to hit at least some smoke. Maybe not ore grade, but you're going to hit some smoke.
Okay. And I've heard a lot of uranium types give props to the Shirley Basin. You know, they just like that basin. Your predecessor said, you know, had you had that project even sooner, you would have probably started there. You know, what makes that basin just a great place to work for ISR companies?
Permeability, porosity. It's a very clean sandstone, exceptionally good water flow in it. And yeah, Jeff's right. If we had had that one first, we probably would have started at Shirley Basin. It's shallower. It's only 300, 350 feet deep. Exceptional permeability. Power lines are there. We have a substation that's there. Roads are there. We have some buildings there. So a lot of that infrastructure is already there. It's closer to town. It's essentially on a paved road. A pavement goes almost all the way to it. So it has a lot of advantages over a lot of the other projects in Wyoming that are much more remote, much deeper, not as good flow. So it has a lot of good technical attributes and economic attributes.
Yeah, it didn't take me long to get there last August from Casper. So
yeah.
Okay. Exploration, you've been focused on development and production for such a long time now. Are you anticipating any increased focus on exploration this year? You know, and if so, what are some of your major projects that might see some work? Do they have historical resources? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Literally yesterday, I was talking with our senior geologist about exploration and our desire to move back into that. Right now, we have a 14-year mine life at Lost Creek, so that's a long time. Shirley Basin is completely drilled out, so we don't have much room for exploration there. But at Lost Creek and within the Great Divide Basin, there is tremendous opportunity, and we do need to get our rigs refocused to exploration. That will come with time, and as we have more drill rigs. I talked about shortages of manpower. That's not just for us. Our drillers experience the same issue. We've got 11 drill rigs on site right now. We have several more that we're working on bringing out, but they don't have a shortage of drill rigs. They have a shortage of manpower to put on the drill rigs. So the rigs we have now, they are dedicated to production. But over time, as we're able to grow that and as we get ramped up and get comfortable that we're far enough ahead with those wells in production, we do intend to redirect some of those drill rigs to exploration at Lost Creek and in that 35,000 surrounding acres, probably do some more drilling at Lost Soldier and some of our other properties in the Great Divide Basin. And who knows, maybe we'll pick up some other greenfield exploration areas in Wyoming. We certainly have some ideas to that end.
Okay, that was my next question. Any further M&As? So listen, chances are. So.
Yeah, M&A, we have not been shy about it at all. We've been very open. We would love to grow the company, either through exploration and or through M&A. We'll see. We'll keep discussions going with other companies. We'll keep looking for opportunities. But I think it's important to pass on. We view our assets as being good quality value assets. If we're going to do M&A, it will be with another company with good quality value assets, things that we believe we can produce economically. So that is the litmus test right there.
Okay. And again, you said discussions with other companies. And this is from a viewer, Strathmore Plus partnership. What might that look like? And do you have a timeline for that partnership if it happens?
Yeah, a good little company. They've got some good properties. They're continuing. Last year they did some exploration, and we'll see how things continue to develop with them. No serious ongoing discussions right now with M&A, but that can change very quickly. We'll see. But we do like the assets they have. I think they've got some great exploration properties, and certainly they are not too far from our Shirley Basin. So within pipeline distance. So something to keep an eye on.
Okay. A couple more questions here, and then we'll wrap it up. But knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently in the last couple of years? And I guess looking ahead, what are the biggest problems that you see needing to be overcome?
Yeah, I'll take it back further than 2 years if I could. As we reduced operations last time after we had ramped up, I really wish we had kept more people and more drill rigs on hand for a little longer, so that during startup we would have had half a dozen header houses ready to turn on. Yeah, that would have been a greater expenditure, but it sure would have made ramp up dramatically easier if that had already been installed and was ready to go. So that's definitely something that we would have done differently. On the M&A front, there's absolutely nothing I would have done differently. I think our board has done a fantastic job, and our senior management historically has done a great job on M&A of maybe being a little slow to the party, but I don't disagree with anything we've done on M&A, but certainly wish we had a few more header houses to bring on.
Okay, so the big problems looking forward, labor?
I think we're doing good on labor. We have our people. I would maybe more specifically characterize it as training. Okay. So we have a lot of young people. They're good hands. They want to work, but there's a lot of training. There's a lot that they need to learn. So it's going to be incumbent upon our senior management and the people that have experience to keep bringing them along to improve our efficiency, to make things happen more quickly. So I'm happy to say the challenges we face now, they're all on the surface. They're all things that we can address. We're not having issues with making wells flow. They're meeting our expectations, and our head grade is very good. So all of the challenges we face, a lot of them are behind us now, but going forward, it looks like they're all very tangible. They're on the surface. They're things we can address and are addressing.
Okay, no, sounds great. So final question here on uranium delivery contracts. How long does it take to negotiate an offtake agreement, start to finish? And what are really some of those major terms or things that utilities need in that contract?
Yeah, you bet. Fantastic question. Certainly is a frustration. We've indicated that we've been in negotiation on some contracts. Typically, the sales terms, the commercial terms, pretty easy. That can be handled within a few weeks. Then the lawyers get involved, and they debate where to put the commas. That can take months. One of the challenges we're facing right now is a number of utilities want assurances that we're not going to back supply with Russian material. And that has been a challenge. They don't want exposure to Russian material. They're afraid that that's going to get cut off. And so that's been a negotiating point that's been challenging, and I suspect it'll continue to be challenging until that situation is resolved one way or the other. But as far as timing, it can take a couple of months to negotiate something. It can take 6 months to negotiate something.
Mm-hmm. So that's, a lot of these contracts, or some of these contracts, are site specific, right? They must come out of Lost Creek if you deliver to them. Right. So that would take it even further. It must either has to come from Lost Creek or somewhere else, but cannot come from Russia. So
right. And the definition of Russia depends on who you talk to. And so that's a part of the discussions.
Right. Okay. Very good. So John, John Cash from UR Energy, thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. A reminder, Red Cloud Securities will be back tomorrow when Taylor sits down with Visionary Metals. So that's February 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Reminder that we have our pre-PDAC conference approaching. That's February 29th and March 1st. We expect close to 100 speakers over 2 days at the Red Cloud event in Toronto, and that includes UR Energy speaking and 27 other uranium companies. And during that time, I'm also going to sit down with a conversation with two of the biggest uranium funds on the planet. We've got Guy Keller of Tribeca and Mike Allen of Sachem Cove speaking. So have a great day, and everyone, thank you for supporting Red Cloud's webinar series.